Well, South Africa's economy has entered a technical recession with a second straight quarterly contraction, and that is according to BankservAfrica Economic Transaction Index. This, as the IMF World Economic Outlook report projects South Africa's growth as among the lowest in the world at 0.1% this year due to increased intensity of power cuts, weaker commodity prices and the external environment. And then, of course, we have Eskom that just yesterday implemented stage 6 load shedding until further notice yet again. Independent economist Elize Kruger says severe power cuts, a 50 basis point hike in interest rates last month and inflation are holding the economy to ransom. Meanwhile, political analyst JP Landman and Nedbank's chief economist Nicky Weimar warned that economic problems could result in outbursts of riots and unrest in South Africa. Now, they were speaking during a Nedbank Private Wealth webinar, and with us we've got political analyst JP Landman and independent economist Elize Kruger to discuss some of the challenges that this country is facing at the moment with regard to the economy. JP, great to have you. Welcome, and to you as well. Elize, thank you so much for your time, both of you.
Thanks, Leanne.
JP, let me begin with you because obviously fresh, and that's if people are actually able to watch us, because stage 6 load shedding at the moment, and stage 6 load shedding is devastating for the economy. The latest developments from Eskom, I mean, what do you make of what's happened in the last 48 hours?
No, look, there's no surprise. We know that we are underproducing. We're not producing enough electricity for the country. The surprises are not that we're sitting at 4 or 5 or even 6. The surprise is that we sometimes have no load shedding. That is the unnatural state of affairs for where we are now. The reality is, Leanne, we produce 6,000 megawatts to Little Tower every day. And as long as that is the case, as long as we do not produce enough power, there will be load shedding. It's as simple as that. The alternative to load shedding is a blackout. And that we certainly do not want. To prevent a blackout, you need to have load shedding. Now, when will this stop? It will stop when we've installed 6,000 megawatts of additional capacity, or if we translate 6,000 megawatts into renewable capacity until we've installed about 18 to 20,000 megawatts of renewables. Then you will have enough capacity and then load shedding will stop.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about this because we obviously have got this new Minister of Electricity, Josienso Ramagopa. We had him on the program earlier this week. It was very hard to ask him questions because his answers are pretty long, doesn't let you quiz him, unfortunately. But, you know, that, I suppose, is just the way it is. He's got a lot to tell, but when you ask questions, it's hard. And one of the things that he came out with was talking to the fact that he wants to restore the current stations and saying that that could possibly be the answer to our problems, our electricity problems, is to restore these current infrastructure that we have that's operating, which of course is coal. This goes against everything we've been speaking about with this whole move and transition. What did you make of what the electricity minister's sort of gathering from his tour around the power stations?
Not much. What else can he do? He has no executive authority, so you know that's the only thing he can do. The critical test for his comments, in fact, for any solution that is proposed on load shedding, Leanne, is very simple. How long will it take to bring that capacity online? If you can build a nuclear power station in 5 months, do it. If you can build a new coal power station in 3.5 weeks, do it. The test is how quickly can you bring new capacity onto line. That's how you will stop load shedding. Now, resuscitating old Eskom power stations is not going to happen within 2 years. Forget that. It's not even going to happen within 3 years. So the timeline is simply too long. And as such, it's not a good idea for alleviating our load shedding crisis. To alleviate load shedding, we've got to get that 18 to 20,000 megawatts of renewable capacity online as quickly as possible. And that, as you know, is in process. It's a question of letting it play out.
Indeed, and that is the great risk. And of course, we've been warned by the Minister himself as well, but these are warnings that have been around for a very long time, that this is going to be a very dark and cold winter, stage 6 being threatened to us. I mean, perhaps that blackout that we're talking about as well may unfortunately come to fruition, which is a great concern. Elize, let me bring you into the conversation. Obviously,
I wouldn't run away. I wouldn't run away with the blackout. I think we should go careful on that one. But essentially, we will have load shedding until we plug the gap, and that's 2 years.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, not a problem. Thanks, JP. Elize, let me bring you in. Obviously, you can chat to the electricity as well, because, I mean, that is a lot to do with everything we're talking about, particularly the economy. BankservAfrica's Economic Transaction Index, an early indicator of economic activity. Talk to us about this and this whole implication of a recession in terms of tax revenue and government's effort to reduce the unemployment rate.
And yes, the Beti from BankServ is a timeous indicator. It gives us an indication of what happened in Q1 long before we get official statistics from Stats SA. So in the past week, we, for instance, had manufacturing production for February, but the Beti already looks at March as well. So it gives you a very good feel for what we could expect in GDP numbers for Q1, but it will only be released a couple of months later. And what we've seen is a significant drop, especially in March, but then for the quarter as a whole, a 1.7% lower Beti compared to December, which to me signals that there's a growing probability that the economy could be in a negative, territory in terms of a negative growth rate in Q1. And then that will be on top of December of Q4's negative number, i.e. we would be dipping into a technical recession. So the Beti is an indicator over time. It's quite volatile from month to month and quarter to quarter. But if you look at it over time, and especially on an annual basis, the correlation is above 80%. So if the Beti is signaling such a big drop, then I think there's a very, sort of growing likelihood that we will see a negative number in Q1. For all those reasons, that you mentioned, I mean, load shedding is the number one reason. All sectors are suffering in load shedding, especially if the stages are higher, as we are currently seeing. On top of that, we've had further increase in our interest rate in the past month. Inflation remains sticky at high levels. So all of those factors in combination is pressing down the economy.
Yeah, and this talk of a recession, are we in a technical recession?
Difficult to say. If you look at official statistics, you would perhaps say no, we just not yet in a negative territory. But if you look at the BankServ data, which is a good indicator, it does signal that we could be in technical recession already. However, if it's a negative number or a zero number, I think what you experience out there is already an economy that is not growing enough, to look after the employment needs of South Africa. It's an economy where all people are suffering. So it's, you already feel it's recession, although the numbers are not yet officially there, but BankServ data suggests we could well be.
And the reality, and I mean, from what I'm hearing from you and just the circumstances that we're currently under right now, whether we talk electricity, high interest rates, very high unemployment rates, this is something that's here to stay for a while and not necessarily ease up anytime soon, but projections are showing that it may very well worsen. Is that what you are looking at as well, Elize?
Yes, indeed. I think we are in this sort of muddle along scenario for definitely longer than what we have hoped for. I mean, as JP also mentioned, if you look at current projects, it will only alleviate the scenario on electricity in 18 to 24 months. So for that period of time that we are now heading into, we will still see more of the same in terms of the current economic environment. And it's obviously not conducive for employment growth, and it's not conducive for investment. Perhaps, with the exclusion of the energy side, where we do see investment going, the rest of the economy has been quite slack in terms of investment growth. And I think what we do see is a lot of companies in survival mode, using extra cash and available financial resources to hedge them against the load shedding scenario. So instead of using capital productive for investment, that capital goes into mitigating load shedding.
Yeah. JP, let me bring you back in here, because you warned that the current problems facing South Africa could lead to riots and unrest. obviously we're hearing everything, the high levels of poverty, of unemployment, of rising food costs, of no electricity, of just businesses falling down on their knees with absolutely no hope in sight for them. I mean, this obviously is a recipe for disaster, but we've been hearing about these riots and unrest and the problems that may come from this. You voiced this concern during or very recently. Talk to us about it. What do you think could possibly happen?
Yeah, actually, it's the headline writer who introduced that. The point I made is the last one that you've made, which is that South African society will carry on to have the tensions that we've had in the past. We've had a Marikana. We've had a July 2021 in KZN. Earlier in our history, we've had a Sharpeville and so on. I don't see these things just disappearing overnight like mist before the sun. Given the tensions and the cleavages and the inequalities and the poverty that we have in our society, I would expect some of these outbursts to continue. But the real point I made in that interview, was that I do not think that we will see a revolutionary outburst in South Africa. That was the question. Why wouldn't we see a revolutionary outburst? Because we're a democracy. It's a release valve. Before people go into really serious revolutionary kind of protest and violence, they vote. If you look at the color revolutions that we saw in Eastern Europe, if you look at the revolutions that we saw a few years ago in North Africa, the one common denominator they all had is that they were not democracies. There was no release valve. People couldn't express their opinions, and the governments tried to suppress it. That does not apply here. So no, I don't think we will see a revolutionary outburst where the whole country's order is overthrown. But will we see protest violence from time to time? Yes, I think that will continue, and we see it around us. It's nothing new.
All right. So thank you for the clarification, because I know that is something that we worry about, and it's spoken about so often about, you know, the country coming into what one could call an Arab Spring, and, you know, talking to this and saying, you know, we are a democracy and we have many ways to express how we feel. So that's important to keep in the back of our minds. It doesn't take away our problems. Yes. It certainly doesn't, but it does allow South Africans to have a voice, and a very loud voice. I want to ask you internationally, though, because we are seeing what's happening. JP, I'll speak to you about this, and then Elize, I'll get your views as well. Great concern about South Africa's political ways, in terms of they've obviously now preparing to send a delegation to the US to talk about our relationship with Russia, and, you know, threats to a lot of the investment that Europe and America have in South Africa because of our standpoint on the whole issue with Russia and the Ukraine, and of course the pending BRICS summit that comes up, and the possibility that Vladimir Putin, Russian president, may come to the country, and there is an arrest warrant that we are a member of the ICC and we should be obliged to arrest him. But the government have said it's not their place to get involved, even though we are a signatory of this. What does this do to us politically, internationally, and investment-wise? JP, please, if I can begin with you.
No, nothing good. Why do you sign international treaties if you're not going to stick to the obligations? Where's the upside there? I'm not very impressed with South Africa's foreign policy and the way Durko is handling our policy. I think we can learn a lot from Brazil. Brazil is very clear in that they want peace in Ukraine. They condemn the Russian invasion, but they're not imposing sanctions on Russia. And in fact, the Brazilian president is keeping the lines open to Putin and to Xi Jinping. And I think the Brazilian example is, for me, much more nuanced. It's much more strategic. For me, the core function of foreign policy and the core function of a department like Durko is to promote the interest of South Africa. That is first and foremost what they have to do. I don't see that coming through at the moment. And I think we can be much more nuanced and sophisticated in the way we play the foreign policy game.
Elize, would you like to add anything onto international relations and investment in the country with our standpoint?
Yes, I do think this is another layer of, I would say, hindering investment in South Africa. So we've had the grey listing that's been added to our list of, I would say, things that make us less attractive. We've got our very low basically non-existent growth prospects. We've got the load shedding. So if you really look at South Africa as an investment destination, it becomes hard, if you're a foreign investor to look at this country relative to other emerging market peers to say, take your money to South Africa. So I think from that point of view, it's another layer of negativity in my view.
All right. Finally, to both of you, and as we wrap this up, currently happening now, in fact, we're going to be crossing over to our reporters soon, is the last leg of the South Africa Investment Conference, which is happening today. Power cuts and basically reaching an industrial scale. Water supplies are constantly disrupted. We've got in Tshwane these pylons lying on their side, and the whole area hasn't got electricity. The road network is crumbling right now. Transnet is falling off the rails, to be blunt about what's going on there. What does South Africa need to put its best foot forward? To look the way we look right now and attract investment. Let's talk about that. I know there are goals to reach, and we meet these goals. We're told we meet these goals, but does it make a difference to the people of South Africa? JP?
Yes, investment does make a difference. There's no question about that. And if we can have double the investment that we're having in the moment, that would be absolutely just good news. So yes, investment is important, and we must try and attract more of it. The president is working hard at it, but you've pointed out to all the difficulties. But let me just say, Leanne, having said that, it's easy to pile up a list of all the things that are not right and not wrong. But I think what we will hear today is also a list of people, also outsiders, people outside the country, who are prepared to come in and do put their money here. Let's not forget that side of the scale. South Africa is always a balance. It's never just a one-way street. On the one hand, you have a list of problems. On the other hand, you have a list of people who are prepared to come in. You take our renewable energy program so far. We're talking about total investment of about 330 billion. It's a huge amount of money. A substantial portion of that came from foreigners, as Minister Patel said in the video that we had just before this interview. The Saudi Arabians have come in, the Norwegians have come in, and in the process, new capacity is being built in South Africa, new technology is being imported, we're doing things in a different way. So yeah, investment is taking place. It would just be very nice if we can do double what we're doing now.
All right. JP, I'm going to have to leave it there. Elize, I'm going to also have to leave it there. We've run into big time problems, but I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, and at the same time giving us optimism there, JP, as we end this interview, because in and amongst all the turmoil, there are always opportunities, and we must never, I suppose, keep that away from our thinking. Political analyst JP Landman, independent economist Elize Kruger, speaking to us about the economic and energy challenges that are facing South Africa, but also talking to the opportunities that still do exist in this country.